Welcome back to the Open Water Talk Show, where we discuss a wide variety of ideas to help support our community of midlife professionals as they navigate what's next. My name is Chris Albrecht. I'm your host, and I'm filled with hopes, actually, because I'm talking today. Listen, I heard her work on the Hidden Brain podcast recently. I guess it was a repeat from one earlier, but one of our members said, "Oh, you should check this out," and I did, and I was thrilled by what she had to say. She is Professor Cassie Holmes, a professor at UCLA's School of Management, and she is the author of Happier Hour. First things first, I'll welcome you to the show. Hi, Cassie, Professor.
Hi.
Professor Holmes.
Hi,
Sorry,
Chris.
you earned
No,
that
of
title.
course.
I'll
Cassie is great. Hello, and I am very happy to be here with you.
All right. So let's just get sort of a baseline right now, right? So you are studying sort of time and how you spend it. Can you give me a little bit about sort of the research you do and the work you do, both in like your book and in your teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have spent my career studying happiness. And by that, it's not this sort of fleeting notion of, how you feel in the moment, but it is how we feel over the course of our days, but also a more general sense of how satisfied we are in our lives, our sense of meaning. Um, and as a working professional with kids, I have continually been struck by time being the factor that is perhaps the biggest barrier to happiness. But I have come to think that it's actually the solution. And so, driven by my own interest of decisions that I should be making to make this career sustainable and this life fulfilling, I have been studying how we should be thinking about and spending our time for greater happiness. And not only in my research, when I started seeing that there's, really practical insights that, no offense to us academics, but nobody reads academic journals, or peer-reviewed publications. But I found that my students could really benefit from this. So I developed a course that I've been teaching for the last 5 years, both to regular MBAs at Anderson, but also executive MBAs. So those in their 40s and 50s who are really sort of not struggling, but faced with this challenge of how do they invest themselves? How do they invest their time so that it, again, continues to feel sustainable, but also, really feels fulfilling. And so this course, Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design, has had an incredible and rewarding impact on my students. And then I was approached to write a book of basically how can these tools, based off of empirics, based off of the research, be spread to a broader audience. And so I agreed to write a book. And so Happier Hour, how to beat distraction, expand your time, and focus on what matters most, shares the empirical insights, but I think even more helpfully shares the assignments and exercises that I give my students so that the broader audience can apply it and use these tools to figure out, okay, what are those activities that are worthwhile? What are those activities that perhaps I shouldn't be spending so much time on? And I think even more importantly, how can we invest our time so looking back on our careers, looking back on our life overall, we don't feel regret.
So I want to touch on that for a second, right? So you have, as you said, sort of these career professionals who come in. What do they come to you like? What are they looking for? Is it a lot of just like, I guess you could say your typical sort of midlife thoughts, right? Where they're at this point where they're looking backwards a lot, or are they looking forwards a lot? Like, what are they coming to you with saying like, I'm in this spot and this is why I want to take this class?
Well, some are very immersed in their presence of like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. How is it that I can juggle my career that I care a lot about with these other considerations like family, like aging parents, like an own individual sense of fulfillment, with and some of that is stemming from actually a sort of projecting to the future of recognizing that we have a whole chapters ahead of us within the career, but then even thinking like, well, what happens when my career is over? What are some decisions that I should be making? Because of course, the decisions that got them to there, like how we dedicate ourselves in our education, how we sort of move up the ladder in our early professional lives, the considerations shift, right? To a sort of bigger sense of like, oh, what impact do we want to have? It's not maybe just about getting the next promotion, but really it's about how do we want to live this life, because people are much more, and in my research, I look at the role of age on both the experiences that elicit happiness, but also the way we experience happiness. And it changes because when we're younger, we view our futures as expansive, sort of never ending. And it's really sort of this future focused excitement of like, what's next? And we are dedicating ourselves to that next promotion. As people get older, they start recognizing that their time in life is more finite. As a consequence, the sort of way we experience happiness shifts from excitement to sort of calm contentment. And also the types of experiences that elicit happiness shift too. Where among younger people, it is that sort of these extraordinary experiences like life milestones, incredible vacations, professional or personal accomplishments. Among older people, those extraordinary experiences do continue to elicit a lot of happiness. But what's interesting is that the ordinary experiences, as people get older, become to be more important. Younger people sort of don't notice those simple pleasures, those that's sort of shared moment with a loved one, a pet, a family member, or noticing nature or enjoying that treat, a glass of wine or that sandwich so much. As people get older, they are much more in tune to savoring those ordinary experiences. And that comes from recognizing that our time in life is finite. And so it makes us notice. It makes us realize just how precious our time is. And so to your question also about like, when you're sort of catching people in their 40s and 50s, they start recognizing their time in life is more finite. They start being sort of grappling with these questions of, what do I want this life to really be about? What are those ways in my day that I'm going to be spending my time? We become much more in tune to what's worthwhile, and sort of missing moments that are wasted become much more painful because our threshold has changed for what we're willing to spend our time on, right? And so I don't know, does that answer the question of
Yeah.
what my
Yeah.
students are coming with?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm in my 50s, right? So I
Mhm.
definitely sometimes there are mornings where I go like, "Oh my, how did I get here? What is happening? What is
Yeah.
happening?" And I don't like you got to hurry up now because, like, well, maybe I guess I won't learn that language or whatever, right? But I guess what I want to explore just a little bit quick, like how are you defining happiness? Because you've used words like happiness and contentment as we're
Mhm.
talking right now. And then if
Yeah.
we think about another, like if in the book How to Be Perfect, right? He talks about flourishing.
Mhm.
Michael Shore does. And so I'm wondering, just as you are looking to help people sort of figure out to make the most of their time, is there sort of a definitional use of the word happy that you are using? It's
Yeah.
something that a lot of people are studying right now. So I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of how you are positioning happiness as it relates to an overall feeling of
Yeah.
contentment.
So what I'm basing it off of is in the psychology literature and behavioral economics literature of what we refer to as subjective well-being. And what that is, it's subjective because it's asking you, the individual, and there's different components of this. There's both how are you feeling in your day? How are you feeling during your experiences over the course of your daily life? But it also is coupled with how you're feeling about not only your day, but about your life overall. And that is typically measured by life satisfaction. Um, there are cases where that sort of emotional experience and that evaluative experience sort of decouple, but the the tools that I sort of promote, I promote sounds like there's like a agenda, which there isn't, other than having people feel good both in their lives and about their lives, um, are those that really sort of pull them together. Is that what are those ways of spending time that feel really satisfying? And I actually like the term joy because it picks up both that emotional experience that it feels positive during it, but it has this extra component of you feeling it's really rewarding and satisfying. And so when I'm using the term happiness, that's what I'm referring to is the coupling of our emotional experience in as well as our evaluation of our lives.
Okay, we're going to go from happiness to something sort of grim because one of the exercises you have your students do is actually write their eulogy.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? And what is it meant to do?
Yeah. And it's a very poignant and very actually powerful and positively powerful exercise, despite how it might sound. And what I do is I ask my students to project forward to the end of their lives, assuming they live a long life. Say you live till 90. And then taking the perspective of someone who will have survived you, what will they say about you? And what that really, and writing it down, like what is it that someone would present as, a eulogy for you? And what that does is it really clarifies the life that we want to live. It highlights what are our values, what ultimately matters, what is our purpose, not just what goals do we have today of checking things off of our to-do list, but it really brings to question and answers what are our goals for what we want to sort of achieve in our lives. And this is based off of my research where we have found that there's different sort of time perspectives, right? And we can think about our days and our hours. And there's a lot of value to that. But if we zoom out and we take this perspective, thinking about our years and our life overall, what we found in our work is that those who take this broader time perspective actually spend their hours better because what they're doing is they're spending their hours more in line with what is ultimately important to them and not just reacting to what seems urgent in the moment. Um, and taking this broader perspective, what the eulogy exercise does is sort of shifts you, out of the days and taking that perspective of your life overall, again, highlighting how should you be spending your hours if this is the life that you ultimately aspire to live? And what's sort of cool about the eulogy exercises, oftentimes, even though I'm asking people to project forward to the end of their life and what they want it to look like, when they're pulling out their values of like who they want to be, it also shows who they are already. And so that's where the power comes in. It's like pulling out those best pieces of yourself, so that that too serves as not only sort of affirmation that, like it serves of affirmation of like who we are, our best sort of versions of ourselves, and then motivation to sort of continue to live out those best versions of ourselves.
So how would you, so as you've talked about, right, like the understanding of happiness or how you want to spend your time changes sort of as you get older.
Yeah.
So for someone reading your book, how do you sort of tackle those different um, audiences, right? Because as you said, if I'm 20 years old, then I'm just happy to be out with my friends. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And then,
Yeah.
I'm getting through Friday and Saturday and then recovering on Sunday and getting back to work on Monday, right? But as you get older, right, then that your sense of time changes and what you are looking for changes,
Mhm.
right? So what
Yeah.
I'm interested in is sort of how you approach that with your book in terms of reaching the widest possible audience, but still providing actionable insight for people who might be at different stages.
Yeah. And it's such a great question because it's super important to me that anyone reading the book gets the value from it, from the research. And there's a tool that I use, and I encourage everyone to do this exercise. And what it is time tracking. And it involves over the course of the week, writing down for each half hour what activity you're doing. As importantly, coming out of that half hour rating on a 10-point scale, how did you feel? And that is picking up on when I'm talking about the happiness of the how satisfying, how fulfilling, how good do you feel from that time? And while it is a tedious exercise, this time tracking, it is so worthwhile for several reasons. One is it shows you where you're spending your time. You know, the research that I'm doing now is on time poverty, this sense of, having too much to do and not enough time to do it, which is a terrible experience. It has all these detrimental effects on our emotional well-being. It makes us stressed out and feel less happy, but it also makes us less healthy. It makes us less nice to the people around us. And we have this sense that like, oh my gosh, I have too many things to do. And yet when people are tracking their time, they see where they're spending their time. And it's like, wow, I'm spending a lot of my time on X that might not be that necessary and might not be that worthwhile. So it's clarifying of like where you're spending your time and provides opportunities for how to like sort of reclaim some wasted time so that you can dedicate it towards those activities that matter. But also what it does is it allows you for yourself, not relying on averages from the research, of how to spend your time, but you can look across your ratings and see what are those activities, the top 5 activities that got the highest ratings for you. And notably, this is a very different exercise than me asking you, what activities do you like to do? Which is based off of lay beliefs. And often we're wrong when we're trying to project, or like these general sense of what we like to do. This is based off of your own actual experience. Having done it, how did you actually feel? So you can pull out what are those most satisfying activities, but as helpfully looking at some commonalities across them. So you might pull out, for instance, that it's actually, in the type of activity that makes me feel like I'm really having an impact, or like truly connecting with other people. Like you might see, for instance, that, that if you ask a happiness researcher or emotional well-being, what's so important is our social connection, our feeling of belonging. Yet, what are those activities that contribute to it? That will vary by individual. For me, it is not going to a party where I feel belonging. For me, it is a one-on-one conversation, whether with a family member, with a friend, with a colleague. And that's really informative for me of not to sort of waste time going to these group lunches that I don't feel like I have time for, but I do it oh, social connection is good. But if I actually see that it's not having the intended effect, then I actually sort of shift that decision and I decide, it's much more worthwhile for me to, set up a lunch date or a coffee date with a colleague or a friend than do these group activities. What you can also see is, what are those activities that are you're least happy, and picking up what are the commonalities across them. In some cases, there are things that you can't really address. These are required. And then I share tools of like those necessary chores in life or activities that feel like a chore, whether in our work or our professional lives that are chores. How do we make those at least feel less onerous? But also, as I said before, sometimes when you're actually looking at it, it's like maybe not that necessary. And given that our time in life is so precious, then that gives us the confidence and really motivates us to pull our hours away from those activities and again, reallocate them towards those activities that matter. And so when I said before, when it comes to time and satisfaction, I viewed it initially as the big barrier for well-being, but I have come to realize that it's actually the solution, because if you are intentional about how you spend your time, and then, which we didn't even talk about, the role of attention, if you're paying attention during those activities that truly matter to you, you're not distracted during them on your phone or, like these disruptions that pull us out of our ability to get into a true flow state where we are at our best. It's both the intention and attention that make it so that when we are spending our time, we are getting the most out of it. And the most out of it is really so that we live these lives that we not only feel satisfied during, but we can look back on without regret.
I want to ask you one tactical question follow up
Sure.
about that, right? Which is, what increments? Is it like a lawyer where you're going down to like the 6 minute increment or whatever, right? And I say that because when you say something like doom scrolling on your phone or looking at social media can be like, oh, I just spent 10 minutes here and I spent 10 minutes there. But then when you add it up at the end of the day, right, like it becomes like, oh, wow, I spent like 2 hours,
Yeah.
zipping through Instagram. So do you like technically, do you say just be general or do you really want it more granular?
I encourage I can actually you could like from my website you can download it's super lo-fi of like a like a piece of paper which has people write down manually by 30 minutes. So, but some people do the hours. So it's actually interestingly, when you look at the research, the time tracking research, that's by 10-minute increments. But I have found that it is absolutely as informative as is 30 minutes. And also it's not like, well, some folks sort of carry around the worksheet and literally at the end of 30 minutes, they're rating. But more often it's sort of as people, every couple hours, they fill in those, 30-minute blocks and as close to the experience as possible so that you aren't sort of pulling to beliefs and instead pulling from your actual experience of doing the ratings. So yeah, my answer is 30 minutes. And there you also see, like, because people will note that it's like, yes, I spent the 30 minutes, working. And also, I also want to point out that it's not like you're writing work or socializing. What work activity are you doing? Are you in a meeting and with whom? Are you working on a deck? Are you, strategizing? If you're socializing, who are you with and what are you doing? So that you can pull out, from your professional life, from your work day, what are those work activities that do feel the most rewarding? What are those work activities that are totally the worst, right? Um, and people will know it's like, yeah, I was spending 30 minutes strategizing, but 20 minutes of that was, looking at social media. And to your sort of gut was people are so surprised by how much time they spend on social media with this idea that it's only a little bit here and a little bit there, but adding up, it's a lot of time. Also, actually watching TV tends to be really surprising for folks because, oftentimes it's like at the end of the workday, everyone finishes dinner and then you turn on the TV. And that hour of TV turns into 2 hours, turns into 3 hours. And people have this sense that that's their sort of that's their sort of fun time. But in looking at their own ratings, you might see that that first hour or even first half hour was really fun, but hour 2, 3 actually didn't feel so great. And then you actually start feeling pretty crummy because you're like tired and you're feeling guilty and you're realizing you wasted your time. But you can see over the course of a week, like, oh my God, I spent 20 hours watching TV. And here I am feeling like I don't have time for the things that really matter in life. It's like that is a clear indicator. And I talk even about how are some strategies to sort of help us not get sort of pulled into those hours and hours so that we can reallocate some of those hours for those things that really matter, like meeting up with a friend for dinner. It's like, oh, I don't have time during my week. I'm so busy. Actually, if you did, what
Yeah.
if one of those nights you didn't, watch TV and then you instead met up with a friend and then you see the energizing effect of it?
I guess that would be my last question here as we wind up. And I thank you for your time, which is, so you're collecting all of this data, right? And the whole
Mhm.
point is to sort of maximize your use of time in the time that you have and
Yeah.
all of those kinds of things. So I'm wondering if you have, because it's one thing to sort of just collect data, but then it's another thing to turn that into intention and then from intention into action,
Yeah.
right? So how do you help people sort of figure that out so they're not just collecting data for data's sake? I mean,
Yeah.
it's probably easy just to go like, oh well, I look like I spent a lot of time on TV, I could probably just go have dinner with a friend. But
Yeah.
it may not, that sounds easy. It's like, well, of course I'll just go to the gym
Right.
6 days a week, right? And like, well, that doesn't always happen, right? So I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
you have strategies or skills or something to help people sort of translate that information into action.
Absolutely. That goes from chapter 3, which is the time tracking of how can we learn from the time we're already spending. And then the second to last chapter of the book on time crafting of given what you've learned about yourself through your time tracking, given what I have shared in the in between chapters about what the research is highlighting as sources of joy, perhaps sources of regret. In time crafting, it's really how, given the week that you have, how can you um, allocate your time? But it's not just allocation, it's actually much more deliberate of what are those activities that are so important to you that you want to protect time for? And then putting them, blocking them in your calendar in places and in ways that allow you to get the most out of that time in those periods of your day where you have the most energy, and that there's individual variation there in the parts of your week where you actually could sort of remove other distractions so you can potentially get into a flow state. How can you sequence them so that you get the most of the good stuff and you actually minimize impact of the not so positive stuff? Because it's not like we can't spend any time on these things that we don't want to do, but how do we sort of put those into our week so that not only are they not sort of carrying over and influencing our sense of dread, but actually we know that they're going to come and we will, dedicate time to them, but dedicate time in such a way that they have as minimal an effect of our overall satisfaction from the week. And again, that sort of, when I talk about happiness, is how we experience those experiences, our days, but also it's pulling out and looking back on our days, looking back on our week, that we feel ultimately satisfied. And so that's yet another sort of point to, it's not that the title of my book is Happier Hour. It's not actually about every hour has to be maximized. It's really how do we piece our hours together in such a way that our life overall is as rich and rewarding and satisfying as possible.
Well, it has been rewarding talking with you today. I really appreciate your time. Professor Cassie Holmes of UCLA School of Management and author of Happier Hour. Get it at your local bookstore,
Everywhere.
bookshop.org, Amazon, wherever you want to get it. Get the book. Highly recommend. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.